Section 5. Liberal Arts and the Western Legacy. The Rise, Eclipse, and Renewal of the Moral Tradition. Welcome back. In the last section, we explored how the Greeks taught that justice begins within, in the harmony of the soul, and how only a just soul can shape a just society. In this section, we move forward in time, to the world of Rome, of Christianity, of the Renaissance, and eventually to our own modern age. We will trace how Greek virtue was joined with Christian love, how reason was fused with faith, and how the liberal arts became a moral tradition stretching across civilizations. But we will also confront a painful truth, that something has been lost, the virtues that once formed the soul. Wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice have faded from education, from public life, and from our moral imagination. We'll ask, what happens when a civilization forgets the soul? When love is divorced from virtue? When liberty is divorced from character? From Plato's ideal of the just soul, to Christ's message of selfless love, to Dante's vision of a world without virtue, we'll discover that the path forward begins not with innovation, but with memory, with recovering the wisdom that was lost, and restoring it in our time. Let's begin. Instructor Introduction. Soichi Nakamura. Before we begin, let me introduce your instructor. Soichi Nakamura is a political philosopher, a best-selling author in Japan, and the founder of LAFE, Liberal Arts for Everyone. Educated in the Ivy League tradition, he has dedicated his life to restoring the connection between ancient virtue and modern life. Through his writing and teaching, he brings together the soul of Greek philosophy, the moral clarity of Christian humanism, and the practical wisdom of the liberal arts. He believes that the greatest crisis of our time is not economic, not political, but spiritual, a loss of soul, and a loss of moral purpose. That is why he created LAFE, to offer a new foundation for character, conscience, and civilization. And to remind us all that love without virtue is fragile, and virtue without love is incomplete. Through his voice, you will hear the legacy of Plato and Aristotle, of Christ and Augustine, of Dante and Dostoevsky, all pointing toward the same truth, that the human soul still matters. Now, let us hear directly from Soichi Nakamura.
Welcome to Section 5, Liberal Arts and the Western Legacy. In this section, we face a difficult truth, that the moral foundation of our civilization is not just fading, it may already be forgotten. We live in an age of progress and confusion. We have knowledge, but little wisdom. We have freedom, but not always self-restraint. And we are connected, but not always united. This is why we turn to the liberal arts, not as nostalgia, but as a living resource for healing the human soul. The tradition we follow here is not simply Greek or Christian, but the fusion of both. The virtues of Plato and Aristotle, and the selfless love, agape, taught by Christ. But agape is fragile. It cannot survive in a world without virtue. As Plato's brothers, Glaucon and Adimantus, feared, love without justice becomes exploitation, goodness becomes weakness, and justice becomes just another form of control. That is why the liberal arts must return, not as a school subject, but as the moral foundation of life. And as Dostoevsky discovered in the harsh prisons of Siberia, Even the most hardened souls longed to be treated with dignity. Even among criminals, those who lived with true virtue were respected. This is not fiction, it is the reality of the soul. Let us now continue this journey and rediscover the forgotten legacy of virtue, love, and the human spirit. How the moral foundations of the West were forged. The liberal arts did not end with Plato and Aristotle, they were transformed by Christ. The four cardinal virtues, wisdom, courage, temperance and justice, were honoured in Greece and Rome, but they found new life in the teachings of Jesus. He did not speak in the language of philosophy, but he lived its highest ideals. His words and actions revealed a deeper force, a love that transcended reason, power and law. This was agape, a love that gives without asking, forgives without limit, and heals what virtue alone cannot. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Jesus, Matthew 5:44. Where Plato sought justice through inner harmony, Jesus offered grace through sacrificial love. Where Aristotle saw virtue as the path to human excellence, Christ offered love as the path to divine transformation. This was not the rejection of reason, but its fulfillment. Greek virtue was not abolished, it was completed. Agape became the soul of justice, the flame that made the virtues shine. To understand the birth of Christian humanism, we need to step back and see the bigger picture. First came the Greeks, with their love of wisdom, their search for virtue. Plato asked what justice was. Aristotle studied how to live a good life. This was the birth of philosophy in Athens 4 centuries before Christ. Then came Rome, not a birthplace of philosophy, but of law and empire. The Romans admired Greek thought. They adopted it, translated it, and added their own ideas. Cicero and Seneca spoke of reason, duty, and self-mastery. Greek virtue now had Roman form. But something was still missing. And that something arrived, not from the centre of civilization, but from its edge. In a small, occupied province of the Roman Empire, far from Athens or Rome, a man named Jesus was born. He was not a philosopher in the traditional sense. He never wrote a book, never led an army. He lived among the poor, preached love to outcasts, and died as a criminal. From the Roman point of view, his birthplace, Judea, was a distant frontier. Just as, from today's American viewpoint, a message from across the Pacific, like from Japan, might seem remote. And yet, from that distant place came a new idea that would reshape the soul of the West. Agape, selfless, unconditional love. Not earned, not deserved, just given. This was not the justice of balance, but the love that forgives, a love for sinners, a love that endures pain, even death. Early Christian thinkers like Paul and Augustine tried to bring this love into harmony with Greek and Roman ideals. They kept reason, but added grace. They valued justice, but placed love above all. Faith, hope, and love remain, but the greatest of these is love. 1 Corinthians 13. This fusion created something new, a soul shaped by both virtue and love. This was the beginning of Christian humanism, and the redefinition of what it meant to be fully human. But this harmony would not last. In the coming centuries, the virtues would be challenged, first by power, then by pride, and finally by forgetfulness. For centuries, the liberal arts were not just a curriculum, they were a way of forming the soul, grounded in virtue, guided by love. But in the modern age, something changed. The Enlightenment brought a great shift. Reason was enthroned, religion was questioned, tradition was replaced by progress, philosophy turned away from the soul toward analysis, abstraction, and ideology. Education became about utility, not wisdom, success, not character. The rise of technocracy. Science advanced, industry boomed, but the moral core of learning faded. We measured progress in GDP, not in virtue. We trained workers, not citizens. We pursued knowledge, but forgot why it mattered. Even the liberal arts were hollowed out. Plato and Aristotle were still read, but rarely lived. Love became sentiment, justice became law, and the soul forgotten. As Dostoevsky warned, without God and without the future life, everything is permitted. The Brothers Karamazov. This was not just a loss of faith, it was a loss of moral imagination. We stopped asking not only who we are, but who we ought to be. In our drive for freedom, we abandoned formation. In our pursuit of progress, we lost purpose. The liberal arts lost their soul because we no longer believed in the soul itself. And yet, the hunger remained. The hunger for meaning, the ache for love, the longing for justice, these cannot be satisfied by systems alone. They require formation of heart, mind and soul. That is why we must begin again. What happens when virtue dies? What becomes of a soul or a civilization that forgets wisdom, courage, temperance and justice? To understand this, we turn to one of the most profound poets and moral philosophers of the West, Dante Alighieri. Born in 13th century Florence, a city filled with political chaos, factionalism, betrayal and ambition, Dante witnessed firsthand what happens when virtue collapses in public and private life. But Dante was not merely a poet, he was a deeply educated thinker, trained in classical philosophy, steeped in Christian theology, and profoundly shaped by Aristotle. In his Divine Comedy, Dante guides us through three realms: Inferno, Hell, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. And in Inferno we see a vision of what happens to the soul when it loses moral order. Dante's hell is not random, it is a moral architecture built not on divine cruelty but on poetic justice. Abandon all hope, ye who enter here. Dante Inferno. Sinners are punished in ways that reflect the distortion of their inner life. The wrathful are trapped in eternal rage. The greedy are crushed by the weight of their hoarding. The liars wear burning masks of molten metal. The flatterers drown in excrement. Their words turn to filth. Each punishment reveals a truth. Vice corrupts not only the world, but the soul. Dante's vision was not invented from imagination. It was rooted in ancient thought, especially Aristotle's ethics. Dante drew directly from Aristotle's theory of virtue and vice, especially the idea that excess and deficiency in moral character lead to destruction. Courage, when exaggerated, becomes recklessness. Temperance, when lost, becomes indulgence. Justice, when ignored, leads to tyranny and abuse. This Aristotelian logic forms the skeleton of Dante's moral universe. But Dante also absorbed the Christian transformation of classical virtue, especially through St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas. Augustine took Plato's idea of the form of the good and called it God. He drew from Plato's eros, the love that seeks truth and beauty, to express the soul's longing for God through faith. But Augustine, a passionate man turned saint, was suspicious of Aristotle's rationalism and gave priority to faith, grace, and divine will. Only later, in the 13th century, did Thomas Aquinas reintroduce Aristotle into Christian thought, arguing that virtue, especially through habit and reason, could be integrated into the Christian life. Dante stood at the crossroads of all of this. He took Plato's longing for the eternal, Aristotle's ethics of virtue, Augustine's theology of the soul, and Aquinas' synthesis of faith and reason, and built a poetic cathedral. His Inferno was not theology alone. It was a map of the consequences of vice, social, spiritual, and civic. And the context of Dante's Florence makes this even more powerful. Florence in the 1200s was a place of stunning art and wealth, but also ruthless corruption and tribal violence. Political factions, like the Guelphs and Ghibellines, fought for control. Families betrayed one another. Justice was for sale. In this fractured society, Dante was exiled for standing on principle. His Divine Comedy is not just a journey through the afterlife. It is a moral indictment of a world gone mad. A world, in many ways, like ours. What of today? We may not believe in a literal hell, but we see the signs of inner collapse. We have lost sight of virtue. And we are living with the consequences. Depression, anxiety, and meaninglessness. Division, outrage, and polarization. Addictions to consumption, power, and distraction. Freedom confused with indulgence. Justice reduced to bureaucracy or slogans. This is not divine punishment, it is a spiritual law, as timeless as gravity. A disordered soul cannot build an ordered world, inspired by Plato and Dante. This is why Dante still matters, because he reminds us that the consequences of vice are not myths, they are real. When souls fall into disarray, societies do too, and the only way forward is to recover what we've forgotten, virtue, not as abstract theory, but as a moral compass, a spiritual discipline, and a foundation for the soul. We live in a time of dazzling progress, but deep despair. We have power beyond the dreams of past empires. We command data, machines, and the global marketplace. We speak of rights, equality, and freedom. But beneath the surface, something is missing. Our civilization is suffering, not from poverty, but from a crisis of the soul. We have forgotten how to form human beings. We train for skills. We demand productivity. We pursue comfort, wealth, and recognition. but we no longer ask, what is good, what is noble, what is worthy of love? This is not a crisis of information, it is a crisis of formation. We are surrounded by stimulation, but starved of meaning. We are constantly connected, but increasingly isolated. We have rights, but lack restraint. We speak of tolerance, but have lost the language of reverence. When the soul is forgotten, society becomes a machine, efficient, but empty. And into that emptiness flows the noise of ideology, resentment, and fear. This is not freedom, this is not progress, this is the collapse of formation, the erosion of the moral core that sustains true civilization. In this vacuum, we often turn to love, to compassion, to inclusion, to agape. But here lies the danger. Agape without virtue becomes exploitation. When the soul is disordered, love can be twisted, used not to serve others, but to control them, to demand tolerance without responsibility, to enable dependency instead of dignity. Even divine love, when placed in unjust souls, becomes a mask for pride and abuse. This was the warning of the brothers Glaucon and Adeimantus. What if injustice benefits the wrongdoer more than justice benefits the just? It is not enough to preach love. We must first cultivate the virtue that makes love real. Look around. Every major institution, government, media, education, even religion, is being pulled into conflict. Trust is collapsing, civility is eroding, people no longer speak, they accuse, they no longer think, they perform. In such a world, justice cannot be restored through systems alone, the soul must be rebuilt. And that rebuilding begins with the classical tradition, with Plato's harmony, Aristotle's phronesis, and the four cardinal virtues, with the rediscovery of what it means to be human. A civilization with wealth but no wisdom is doomed to collapse. A society with rights but no virtue will turn freedom into chaos. But there is another path, not forward into more noise, but downward into the roots, back to soulcraft, back to character, back to formation. That is the work of liberal arts, that is the mission of LAFE. Not to recover the past, but to restore the human soul as the foundation of the future. The world is broken, not by ignorance, but by a lack of virtue. That is why we must return, not to the past, but to the foundation of the soul. This is the mission of the liberal arts, and this is the calling of LAFE, to revive what was lost, the four cardinal virtues, wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice, and to restore their bond with love, with agape, the love that gives without asking. But let us be clear, agape cannot survive without virtue. Even selfless love is corrupted when the soul is disordered. A society that lacks virtue will always produce those who exploit love, who demand sacrifice but offer nothing in return. This is exactly what Glaucon and Adeimantus feared, and this is what Socrates answered, with a vision of justice rooted in the soul. Only when the soul is rightly ordered, only when a person lives by virtue, can love become what it was meant to be. Not a burden, not a weakness, but a force of moral beauty. This is not theory, it is history, and a legacy we are called to renew. As Dostoevsky discovered in the Siberian camps, even the most fallen soul longs to be treated as human, and even the most hardened criminals respected the truly virtuous. We will explore this in the next section. For now, remember this: the liberal arts were never just about books, they were always about the soul, and the civilization it makes possible. We have walked a long path, from the soul of Plato to the love of Christ, to the moral imagination of Dante, to the fractured world we see today. And through it all, one truth remains: there can be no true love without virtue, and no virtue that ignores love. Agape, the selfless love of Christ, is not just a feeling, it is a choice, a discipline, a gift of the soul. But that gift can only be given by those whose souls are shaped by virtue. Those who lack justice exploit the love of others. Those who lack temperance indulge and destroy. Those who lack courage abandon what is right. Those who lack wisdom deceive and are deceived. This is exactly what Glaucon and Adimantus feared, that injustice would benefit the wrongdoers and punish the good. And this is why Socrates taught that the soul must be formed before the city can be just. Plato gave us the vision. Aristotle refined it with practical wisdom. He taught us that friendship, philia, must be rooted not in pleasure or gain, but in virtue. Only then can true love, agape, As Dostoevsky would later discover in the Siberian camps, even the most fallen soul longs to be treated as human, and even the most hardened criminals respected the truly virtuous. This is not philosophy as abstraction, it is moral truth discovered through suffering, and that discovery became the cornerstone of Dostoevsky's moral universe, a vision that we will explore further in the next section. The next section begins that practical journey. How can we apply these truths today? How can we recognize virtue in ourselves and build it in our lives? We begin not with a university but with you, your soul, your choices, your moral character. This is where the liberal arts must begin, not in institutions, but in the formation of the person, and once that journey begins, we will return, in the final section, to the institutions that still carry this legacy forward, including one of the most influential, Columbia University's core curriculum.
Key takeaways, Section 5. Liberal arts and the Western legacy, the rise, eclipse, and renewal of the moral tradition. Of virtue and love are not separate ideals. The four cardinal virtues and agape complete each other. Without virtue, love becomes naive. Without love, virtue becomes rigid. Jesus lived the virtues. His justice, courage, temperance, and wisdom gave flesh to agape, love that sacrifices, but also sustains. The moral tradition was lost. In the modern age of freedom and reason, virtue was forgotten. We gained rights, but lost character. Dante saw the cost. A world without virtue leads to disorder, fear, and spiritual decay. Hell is not a place, it is a consequence of vice. The crisis is not political or technological, it is moral. The soul of our civilization is fractured. Without inner harmony, outer order collapses. A liberal arts must return, not to entertain, but to restore, to form judgment, nourish virtue, and prepare souls for love and leadership. Dostoevsky witnessed this truth. In the darkest corners of humanity, he found that even broken souls respect true virtue, and that without moral formation, even freedom becomes a prison. Transition to Section 6. So what do we do? When virtue has faded and love has become hollow, we return, not to nostalgia, but to wisdom that still speaks. We begin again, with the formation of the soul, because no system, no policy, no freedom or right can save a civilization if the people within it are broken. The answer lies not just in the past, but in practice, in how we shape our own character, in how we live, lead, and love. In the next section, you will begin that journey. You'll learn how to examine your soul, cultivate the 4 cardinal virtues, and apply them in real life. You'll see how education, when rightly understood, is not about information, but about transformation. And you'll take the first steps toward restoring not just your world, but yourself.